Stretched out hands, accompaniment in the light of the wounded Christ. So, part one, Vicente and the question. So, breakfast on the seashore. That is the title of this symposium. And when I saw it, I had a rough sense of what I wanted to talk about, because I've been thinking about this scene, this encounter on the seashore in John 21, for quite a while, in a particular moment that I'll talk about in a few paragraphs. The risen Christ, in this moment, bearing the wounds he chose to keep, standing on the shore, a charcoal fire already lit, a meal already prepared, and the disciples who had abandoned him and who had denied him, coming ashore to find that he was waiting for them. And as was noted last night, waiting for them not with a rebuke, but with breakfast. Now, this image and this encounter, especially the conversations that immediately follow with St. Peter, have shaped how I think about accompaniment. And the reason it has shaped me is because of my brother Vicente. So my brother's name is Vicente. Vicente has a profound intellectual disability. It's not the most important thing about him, but it is a significant feature of his life. The most obvious thing that people notice when they first meet Vicente is his wheelchair, the signs of cerebral palsy, and the severity of his condition. This is usually not the most accurate way to do this, but as a point of comparison, my brother's cognitive aptitude as a 50-year-old man, he's my big brother, is similar to that of a 5-month-old infant. But if you sit with my brother, watching him as he makes sense of your strangeness, you'll notice other things. My brother's eyes are hazel. Shades of coffee, threads of cinnamon. Sheesh. My brother's eyes are hazel. Shades of coffee, threads of cinnamon, flecks of green and gold. And although Vicente never looks directly at anyone, he can see you and the appearances he perceives, maybe dim and partial. But Vicente has the capacity to apprehend something true about what he perceives. In the words of von Balthasar, he can perceive and apprehend the form, the unity of the form in the world. And you'll see exactly this if you watch for the light in his eyes. There are other things that people see only if you spend time with our family. The ordinary things that go along with my brother's condition and that are just part of life, like meals and bathing and diapers and medication, grooming. Vicente is entirely dependent upon the attention and care he receives from others. He spends his days napping, playing with his toys, and listening to the sounds of the world. He's always had an open and receptive posture toward whatever's happening around him. And although Vicente is quick to smile and he enjoys being teased, like a towel being briefly draped over his head, that's hilarious. Although he's quick to smile and enjoys being teased, his personality tends to be a bit on the serious side. Sometimes he's grumpy, sometimes he's impatient, sometimes he's anxious, other times he's silly or bored. My brother has a happy life filled with family, with friends, good food, and good music. Now, among the most striking things about my brother is his utter incapacity for pretense. He cannot construct the elaborate fictions that we invent to manage how others see us. One way of saying this might be his poverty, material, cognitive, and social. It's unveiled and undeniable and unmasked. Now, as St. Thomas has helped me understand the significance of my brother's condition and the teachings of the Catholic Church, I'm convinced of at least 3 things. First, I am convinced that there is nothing defective about my brother's humanity or his ability to know and love God. Second, I'm convinced that there's nothing abnormal about his baptismal membership in the body of Christ or his call to Christian discipleship. And third, when it comes to the universal call to holiness, I am convinced that I need my brother's merciful regard as much as he needs the merciful regard of others. So here's the question I want to put before us this morning, and it is, I think, at the heart of what this panel is asking us to consider. What does it mean to accompany someone like my brother? And perhaps the more difficult question, what does my brother's life reveal about what accompaniment actually is, what it actually means? Not as a program, not as a technique, but as a way of being present to one another that tells the truth about the human condition. How exactly does his life glorify God? To answer that, we need to start with the human condition itself. 2, what does it mean to be human? So many, perhaps most of the mistakes we make in accompanying one another begin with a mistaken picture of what human beings are, about what it means to be a human being. So I don't know about you, I like reminders. Hopefully reminders don't bother you. I need reminders all the time. Let me lay out some of what the Christian tradition actually says about us, because this has a direct bearing on everything else that follows. So we're body and soul, not angels trapped in flesh, not beasts aspiring to thought. We are embodied creatures whose corporeal limitations and dependencies are not accidental features that could be removed while leaving us essentially intact. They constitute the very means through which we exist as beings formed in God's image and towards God's likeness. We learn through sensation, and what that means is we are by nature vulnerable. We grow through time, and we change in time. We require sustenance and rest. We depend on others throughout our lives. These features define us, the particular kinds of creatures that God intends us to be. Now, Aquinas makes this point with characteristic clarity in his Summa Theologiae, the Prima Pars. He asks whether the human body was given, quote, an apt disposition, end quote, or a fitting disposition. Is this vulnerable body, my vulnerable body, your vulnerable body, is this good? Now, his answer is that God fashioned the human body in the disposition that was best suited to our nature and its operations and the end towards which we are ordained. The vulnerability is not an oversight, it's design. To be invulnerable would not be to be more human, but to be less human. It would be to be a statue when God made us to be living, smushy beings. And this means that dependence is not the exception to the human condition. It is the rule. We begin dependent, every one of us, helpless at infancy, and we end dependent, every one of us, if we're granted enough years. And in between, some of us are profoundly dependent upon others, while others of us enjoy a brief season that we mistake as independence. But even that season is sustained by others, by those who grow our food, who maintain our roads, who teach us their language, their words, and their thoughts, who educate us and our children, who preserve our sanity and well-being in the world. The body we receive is not meaningless material to be managed, but a singular point of encounter. Now, the International Theological Commission put out a recent document just about 6 or 7 weeks ago. Vadis Humanitas, humanity, where are you going? And the primary concern of this document is transhumanism. This is how it's put in that document. The body is the place where each person recognizes himself or herself as generated by others, end quote. Accepting the body as given is what the ITC calls the truly ecological choice. Now, I want to draw our attention to something the church says further in this document. And it's something remarkable about impairment, illness, and injury, or disability. It affirms clearly that dependence and vulnerability are, quote, integral elements of every human experience, end quote. Not elements of some people's experience, but of every human experience. And it goes, and it says that the condition of disability, quote, keeps personal identity firmly anchored to the given bodily spiritual reality of the particular person, and that in the context of the whole person and his or her history, disability can also be an opportunity for good, wisdom, and beauty. Now, end quote. I want you to hear what is not being said. The ITC is not saying that disability is necessarily good in itself, as though an impairment, illness, or injury is necessarily something to be celebrated. It's saying that the natural vulnerabilities and dependencies that disability makes visible are constitutive features of what it means to be a creature, features through which we are opened to relationship with God and neighbor. And here's the magisterial point that ties this all together. In a different document, from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, Dignitatis Infinita. There, the church insists that the recognition of human dignity, quote, cannot be contingent upon a judgment about the person's ability to understand and act freely. Otherwise, it would not be inherent in the person, end quote. Dignity belongs to what we are, not what we can do. It belongs to the infant who cannot reason, to the elder who's lost the capacity for discursive reasoning. It belongs to my brother Vicente, who has never been able to dress himself or to speak a sentence. Our vulnerability is not a defect. It's a feature integral to human flourishing. Grace does not eliminate our poverty, but transfigures it into a meeting place of encounter with God and with each other. Now, if this is what it means to be human, if we are all creatures marked by dependence and vulnerability, if our dignity rests in what we are rather than what we achieve, what does this mean? What does this tell us about how we accompany one another? What changes when we understand accompaniment not as the strong helping the weak, but as fellow creatures recognizing a shared condition of vulnerability and dependence? 3, accompaniment reframed. If dependence and vulnerability are constitutive of what it means to be human, not defects, but features of our created nature, then something follows for how we understand accompaniment. The ITC in the document, Vadis Humanitas, puts it simply like this. Quote, persons cannot fully find themselves except through a sincere gift of themselves to the other, end quote. We are made for communion. Our identity is not something we achieve alone and then bring fully formed to relationships with others. It's something we receive through others in relationship over the course of a lifetime. Now, this is true for every human being. It's not more true for me than for my brother, or more true for my brother than for me. It's equally true for all of us, even though some of us are better at disguising it. And that disguise, that pretense of self-sufficiency, this is the deepest obstacle to authentic accompaniment, some might argue. You can think about it. You can think about it for yourself. Many of us, perhaps most of us, spend a great deal of energy maintaining the fiction that we are basically independent. We manage our own affairs, we provide for ourselves. I don't need help. Or if we do, we need it temporarily, and we're embarrassed by it. We construct entire lives around the performance of autonomy, and we aspire towards autonomy. We idolize autonomy. Now, my brother can't perform this. My brother Vicente cannot pretend to be self-sufficient. He cannot dress himself, he cannot feed himself, or take himself where he wants to go. His dependence is total, and it is visible, and it's permanent. And because it is visible, it does something that our performed independence cannot do. It tells the truth. Now, the pretense of self-sufficiency, this is not a modern invention. It's as old as the refusal in the garden. Eat of the fruit, and you will be like God. Now, the ITC in Vadis Humanitas traces it to the rupture, and it's riffing with Gaudium et Spes, traces this refusal to the rupture at the root of our fallen condition, a rupture that began with the rejection of God's gift and that tore the fabric of relationships with other human beings and with the created world, end quote. The pretense is ancient, only its forms are modern. We're not that creative. Today, it wears the mask of individual autonomy, of a twisted idea of meritocracy, of the fiction that some lives are independent and others are patently dependent, that some of us are givers and some of us are receivers, and those are the rules where we fit ourselves and find ourselves. But accompaniment becomes possible. Authentic accompaniment, not as counterfeit. Authentic accompaniment becomes possible only when this pretense drops, only when the bullshit drops away. That was a paraphrase of St. Thomas. Let me make a distinction here. The tradition distinguishes between misericordia, mercy, charity, animated compassion that enters into another situation, on the one hand, and condescending pity, which looks down from a presumed or invented height. Now, the difference between misericordia, mercy, and condescending pity is not a difference of degree. It's a difference of kind. Condescension presupposes a gap. I am here and you are there, and I reach down. But misericordia, the mercy that Christ embodies, presupposes a common ground. That's the heart of the miserable misericordia, of the miserable heart that is shared between two persons. I am where you are. Your poverty is my poverty. My poverty is your poverty. My need is your need. Your need is my need. Our poverty and need is different in expression, but identical in kind. Accompaniment, authentically understood, is misericordia. It is the virtue mercy. It is presence that recognizes, not pity that distances. It is standing with, not stooping toward. And it begins with a recognition that happens all at once, not in two steps, but in one. When I recognize my brother's need, I do not first observe his condition and then, as a separate reflection, turn to reflect stoically and dramatically on my own. It happens in a single act. His visible dependence confronts my performed independence. And in the confrontation, both truths emerge together. He has a profound need. He is profoundly needy. I am profoundly needy. His neediness is obvious. Mine can be concealed. But both are equally real. You cannot truly see someone else's need and poverty without discovering your own, and you cannot discover your own without making the space to recognize the need and the poverty of others. Now, Pope Francis confirms this in his in Dilexit Nos. He writes, quote, "We become ourselves only to the extent that we acquire the ability to acknowledge others. While only those who can acknowledge and accept themselves are then able to encounter others," end quote. Self-knowledge and recognition of the other are not separate operations. They are one act in two dimensions. I cannot truly see my brother. I cannot truly see Vicente without seeing myself. I cannot truly see myself and understand who and what I am without seeing and recognizing my brother. This is why accompaniment is not a program. This is why accompaniment is not a policy. It is not a set of best practices. It is first and foremost a posture, a way of being present that gives and receives simultaneously. Those who accompany my brother, family, caregivers, community, those who accompany my brother, they discover, if they are honest, that they are being accompanied. Vicente does not perform. He does not pretend. He does not maintain the distance. And in this lack of all the disguises the rest of us like to wear, he creates a space where truth about the human condition can become visible. It is a safe space where I can just be myself. I can stop faking. I can stop pretending. Within the body of Christ, there is no us and them. There's just us. There is no us and them. There's just us. There are no givers on one side and receivers on the other. There are only creatures, dependent, vulnerable, wounded, stinky, leaky, lumpy creatures, held in existence by a God who knows our condition because he entered it. But where does this capacity for accompaniment come from? Where do we learn what it looks like to stand on common ground with the vulnerable, to be present without pretense, to receive as much as we give? What does it look like when we find the fundamental ground of our vulnerability, of our poverty, of my pretense? We learn it from the one who first accompanied us. 4, the wounded Christ in Breakfast at the Seashore. First, the wounds. In the penultimate chapter of John's Gospel, chapter 20, I know the topic was chapter 21, but in the penultimate chapter 20, the risen Lord appears to his disciples. He enters through locked doors that were locked out of fear. And the first thing he says is, "Peace be with you." And then John tells us he showed them his hands and his side. We can think about this. The risen Lord, glorified, victorious over death, chooses to present himself to his friends by first showing his wounds. Not his power, not his triumph, but his wounds. Now, Thomas, the apostle, was absent. And when the others told Thomas what had happened, he refused to believe. You know the story. He says, quote, "Unless I see the marks of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and put my hand in his side, I will not believe." And as you know, as we all know, a week later, Jesus came again and said to Thomas, "Thomas," he called Thomas's bluff, "Thomas, put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe," end quote. St. Thomas Aquinas returns to this scene repeatedly. He asks a question that matters for us today. Why did Christ retain the wounds of his passion? Why did Christ retain the wounds? He could have risen with a body unmarked by the passion. Why didn't he? Now, St. Thomas's answer, drawing on St. Augustine, is striking. The traces of Christ's wounds, he writes, are, quote, belong neither to corruption nor to defect, but to the greater increase of glory, inasmuch as they are trophies of his power. And a special comeliness will appear in places scarred by the wounds, end quote. The wounds are not damage that the resurrection failed to repair. They are the radiance of a love that gave itself completely. In other words, what looks like a defect from one vantage is revealed in the light of the resurrection to be a surpassing beauty. The body is, Aquinas says, not less entire, but more perfected, precisely because it bears the marks of what was suffered, of what was endured. Now, this matters for how we think about accompaniment. Because the one who accompanies us, the one who stands with us in our vulnerability, is not unmarked by bodily impairment, illness, injury, pain, suffering. He bore his wounds and he bears his wounds. He bears the marks of his passion eternally. And those wounds are not residual damage. They're glory. Now, you all have read your Bible, so you'll remember John 9, from John 9, what Jesus said when asked for the final purposes of the blindness experienced by the man who was healed of blindness. It's to bear witness to the glory of God. So now the breakfast. Coming back to John 21. Now in John's final chapter, the risen Christ appears again, this time by the Sea of Tiberias. The disciples have gone back to fishing. Peter, who had denied Jesus 3 times, come on, man. Peter says, "I'm going fishing." And they fish all night and they catch nothing. At daybreak, Jesus stands on the shore. They didn't recognize him. And he calls out, "Children, have you caught anything to eat?" And as you know, they haven't. And he tells them where to cast the net. And suddenly, the catch is overwhelming. But here is the detail I want you to notice. One of the details I want you to notice. When the disciples came ashore, they find that Jesus had already prepared a fire with fish on it and bread. He didn't wait for them to bring in the catch. He didn't require them to succeed before feeding them. The meal was ready before they arrived. And the word that John uses for fire, anthrakia, a charcoal fire, appears only one other time in the entire gospel. At the fire where Peter denied Jesus 3 times. The fire of failure becomes the fire of reconciliation. The place of denial becomes the place of restoration. The place of spiritual wound becomes the place of healing. And Jesus says, come and eat. Vamos a comer. No interrogation, no lecture about why they went back to fishing instead of preaching the resurrection. No conditions, just an invitation to eat, offered by a wounded man who's already prepared the fire. This is what a company looks like when it flows from the heart of God. It is patient. It is ordinary. It nourishes before it questions. It meets us at the place of our failure and offers us bread. After the meal, something else happens. Jesus turns to Peter. 3 times he asks Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Mirroring the triple denial. And each time Peter answers yes, growing more frustrated and hurt. And each time Jesus responds, feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. The denial is not erased from Peter's history. It is redeemed. The wound is transfigured into a commission. And then Jesus says something remarkable. He tells Peter, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not want to go. When you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and used to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go. Now, I read this passage and I think of my brother, being dressed by others, being taken where others decide, stretching out his hands while someone else fastens the belt around him. This is a description of my brother's daily life. This is what profound dependence looks like, not as an abstraction, but as the concrete, bodily, ordinary reality that my family lives together every day. And Jesus says that this is how you will glorify God. This is how Peter will glorify God. Not despite the dependence, not by enduring it with noble resignation until the dependence ends, but in and through the dependence itself. The loss of autonomous self-direction, the stretching out of hands of being taken is, on the logic of John 21, a form of glorifying God. Would you recognize the glory of God? Now, I want to be careful here, because John's immediate reference is Peter's martyrdom. And tradition tells us that Peter was crucified. And I'm not conflating martyrdom with disability. What I am pointing to is the point that I learned from St. Thomas. I'm pointing to the theological structure that Jesus reveals in this passage. The dependence on others, the surrender of self-direction, the stretching out of hands to be dressed and carried, these are not, in the grammar of the gospel, obstacles to the glory of God. They can be its instruments. And Vicente lives this now. My brother stretches out his hands every morning and someone else dresses him. He is taken where others decide. He cannot fasten his own belt. And if Jesus is telling Peter the truth, if Jesus is telling Peter the truth, that this kind of surrender is how one glorifies God, then perhaps my brother, in his incapacity for autonomous self-direction, is closer to the heart of what Jesus describes than most of us will ever be. This, as I see it, is the Christological foundation of accompaniment. The one who accompanies us bears his wounds. He prepares the fire at a place of our failure. He feeds us before he questions us. He tells us our destiny. All of our destiny involves the surrender of self-sufficiency, the stretching out of hands, and the acceptance of dependence. And he calls this glorifying God. And then he says to Peter and to us, follow me. So what does accompaniment ask of us? And this is where I'll close. Not a technique, not a program, not a strategy. Accompaniment asks us to stop performing. It asks the courage to stop pretending that we are strong. We are the strong ones helping the weak ones. The humility to receive from those we think we are serving. The patience to sit with someone whose poverty, impairment, illness, injury, brokenness cannot be fixed, and to recognize that their poverty is our poverty. This has practical force. The next time you sit with someone in your parish or in your ministry or in your family life whose need you cannot fix, someone whose dependence is permanent, remember that you are not the strong one helping the weak. You are a creature sitting with another creature. There is no us and them. There's just us. And the distance you may feel, the discomfort, the urge to do something, the temptation to manage, that distance is the pretense. Thanks be to God that Christ has liberated us from that pretense. Thank you.